The COP28 climate summit is in overtime after the delegates in Dubai failed to reach an agreement by Tuesday's deadline. Now, we shouldn't get too excited by that. That's not unusual that they go into extra time. But perhaps it's the it's the gap between the parties. Many have criticised Monday's draft deal, which failed to include a call to phase out fossil fuels. Saudi and other producers have been resisting that language. Bob Ward is a policy director of the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change at the LSE. I mean, look, they know fossil fuels are going to be wound up. Why are they fighting tooth and nail over minor linguistic differences in a communique that'll be read once and forgotten thereafter?
Well, it won't be read once and forgotten thereafter. It will be a commitment made by all the countries. And we saw earlier in the week a letter from OPEC to its member countries, warning of the dangers of an agreement at this UN climate summit to phase out fossil fuels. And they're clearly worried about it because they expect there to be action. And what we have inside these countries, and it's true in the United States as well, of course, because it's the world's largest oil producer, that there are those who think it's in their short-term financial interests to resist action on climate change, to hold back regulation and policy as long as possible. But what it's doing is it's putting the rest of the world at risk, because we are now seeing more clearly than ever the growing impacts of climate change that are having widespread consequences for lives and livelihoods around the world.
But it's always difficult. I mean, except for those first early COPs where core targets and then Paris was said, it's difficult to say that this communique means much when, you know, it's the old argument. Everybody knows what they need to do. They just can't get re-elected or stay in government or be profitable if they actually do it.
Well, I mean, the Paris Agreement in 2015 has had a big impact. It has led lots of countries to act, and countries are acting. They're just not acting quickly enough and strongly enough. Now, the significance of this year's summit is that it's the first so-called global stocktake. People are taking a look at the action that's been taking place. They've recognized that collectively it's not enough, and it will inform the pledges that they are supposed to bring forward in 2 years' time. And that will have to be based on action, because it's very, very clear that we are not on target to deliver on Paris. And what that means is going to be widespread damage across the world. Nobody will be immune to it. That will damage economies and damage lives. And that's why it's so important.
Yeah, whenever I see I get the feeling that the companies involved, companies, not governments, companies are sort of having to do a lot of the heavy lifting here, the private sector. It may not have the funding yet that is required from the public sector, but actually the hard work is being done by the private sector.
Well, the hard work is being done by the private sector because they can see the benefits. There are huge investment opportunities here for the private sector, particularly in emerging market and developing countries, to invest in the growth of new green energy and other opportunities. What they want is governments to be a lot better at designing policy so that they can invest with confidence and not face chopping and changing of policies. That is what is the biggest incentive to investment, is policymakers who don't stick with it.
Right, can I just ask you, if you take the minor, my words, not yours, linguistic differences between phasing out fossil fuels and a reduction in fossil fuels, is it your fundamental gut feeling that actually they are all on the same page? That the fossil fuels have to go, it's only a question of how and how fast?
Now, I think there are lots of government and lots of campaigners around the world for whom climate change is a battle with the fossil fuel industry. The fossil fuel industry is the biggest driver of greenhouse gas emissions, which are causing climate change. They are also regarded as the major obstacle to policy. And that's why this has become a kind of existential battle between those who worry about fossil fuel companies and those who are profiting from the fossil fuel industry.
If you're a gambling man, if you were, where's the next COP going to be?
They've already agreed that it's going to be in Baku in Azerbaijan next November.
Because
Another country that relies on fossil fuels, but we have to have them all on board because
Right, but
still
come
more
on,
than 80% of the energy is supplied by fossil
it was a
fuels.
shabby business where Russia vetoed it being held in a European country. So I'm guessing that Bonn was the default option, that being the headquarters of COP. So Baku has come to the rescue, excuse me, and Russia has clearly allowed that to take place. But arguably, sir, Dubai's energy infrastructure, the people who run it are more sensitive to political pressure than, say, the ones in Baku.
Well, I think every fossil fuel producing nation is beginning to feel the pressure now. And it is very interesting that here in the United Arab Emirates, which is a member of OPEC, I think Saudi Arabia is going to find it much more difficult to wreck a deal because it will have widespread regional consequences if it causes an embarrassment for the host nation.
Very grateful, sir. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Richard.